and let's face it, many adults are impatient too,
Yeah.
Some people like to get results right away and just for whatever reason just don't have the patience to sit out in a situation like that all day. But it's not realistic many days to think you can go into a place and shoot, a full limit of ducks. To me, it was a tremendous success. I'm like, this is great. I got 3 or 4 ducks and still got to work on time and, just felt like it made the most of the day and of the situation. And of course, they don't always work out like that. I mean, some days you'd go to a similar situation and look at the sky and see nothing, I'm like, well, I got to go to work. But I always look at it, everyone is an opportunity. Even if it's only for an hour, you still have a chance to go duck hunting. And many a times in the right situation, you can have a successful hunt. And as we've said many all along through this podcast, even if you don't find success that day, you're still learning something.
Delta Waterfowl is the duck hunters organization, and what we're doing is managing out here to increase duck production.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl. Brought to you by Rig'em Right and Lucky Duck.
Welcome back to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Bryce, and I appreciate you carving out time to join us today. In today's fast-paced world, time is one of the most valuable things we have, and that includes time spent in the duck blind. If you're like most hunters, you've probably found yourself squeezing hunts into tight windows, either before work, before church, before the next practice or meeting. Sometimes that means fewer ducks over the decoys. But maybe there's a way to make those short hunts count. Today, we're taking a closer look at what you can do with just 1 hour. Can you set a spread, shoot a couple of birds, and still get back in time for everything else on your plate? Absolutely, and we'll talk about how. Joining me is longtime Delta contributor and outdoor writer Brian Lovett. He's known for delivering smart, practical advice to help waterfowlers make the most of their time in the field. If you've ever felt like there's just not enough time to hunt, this episode is for you. With that introduction, let's get started. Brian Lovett, welcome to the Delta Waterfowl podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Joel. Glad to be here.
Well, you're taking a central theme to this conversation, Brian, is time, right? And so we only have so much time in our world to do all the different things. So thank you, I guess, in with duck season upon you, that thanks for taking your time and joining us on the podcast.
Happy to. We're lucky here right now. It's closed in this part of Wisconsin until tomorrow morning, so don't have quite the urgency I normally would, but that'll all change tomorrow. So
yeah. So Brian, let's spend a little bit of time. So for the listener, we're going to talk about, I think if we're going to put a title on this, we're going to talk about a 60-minute duck hunt. So we're going to use that as a concept about, hey, in this time-starved world that we all live in, how do you fit in your passions into the little nooks and crannies of your schedule, right? So yeah.
It's, always a challenge, I mean, most people don't have the luxury of having all duck season just to chase ducks on at their leisure, I guess, We have jobs and other family commitments, and sometimes you're just trying to cram it in, I guess. And for many years I worked in an office setting in central Wisconsin and would try to get in quick duck hunts before work or after work. And it was lucky I could do so close to the office, but it usually involved, a lot of scouting, observation to try to identify spots I could get in and out of quickly, and moreover, identify situations in which you might have some really good action that first hour and be able to get out of there and have a successful, enjoyable duck hunt and still make it to work on time at 8 o'clock. So, and it's, it's one of those things that doesn't work 100% of the time, but once you kind of get used to the system, I guess, and know what to look for, you can pull it off surprisingly quite often. So,
yeah. So at the end of this podcast, our mission is to share with people some tips and tactics and strategies on how to approach those quick little hunts. And you might have to, I think, not to bury it too far, but it does probably require a little bit of a change in expectations as well, right?
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not realistic many days to think you can go into a place and shoot, a full limit of ducks. Often in my situation here in Wisconsin, we have quite a few little wood duck holes, and wood ducks were always sort of tailor-made for that type of hunt. But of course, they're very active right at first light. If you're where wood ducks want to be at first light, you can have some great action and actually have a fantastic hunt and shoot your 3 woodies, in a few minutes and be on your way to work. But it applies to all species as well. I mean, if you, like you said, adjust your expectations. I always figured if I could get a couple ducks, I'd be happy. If you got more, it was a great day, but I never really fully went in there with the intention of hanging a full limit. It happened a couple of times, but generally you were taking 2 or 3 ducks and just kind of you're still enjoying the day. You're getting out hunting, you're getting some ducks, but you're not, obviously you don't have the luxury of waiting there all day, for the mid-morning flight or the weather change or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So before we get too far into the conversation, Brian, let's introduce the listener to you. I think people that are Delta members, get our magazine, read the magazine, your name is probably going to go, oh yeah, Brian Lovett, that's that guy. So why don't you write our strategy column for the Delta Waterfowl magazine, correct?
Yep, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why don't you tell the listener, just let's go back, we'll do a crash course, spend maybe a couple minutes on it, but go back to, your upbringing. Where are you from? What brought you to this moment? And I always, I know you're a hunter, so I'm always curious, the role, touch on the role of hunting in your life as well. Rig'em is an industry leader in high-quality waterfowl gear and proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. From blind bags, backpacks, and gun cases to dog vests, dog stands, and dog blinds, Rig'em has you and your hunting dog covered for long days in the duck marsh. And even more exciting, Rig'em has launched its new mainline series decoys that are lightweight, durable, and they look awesome. Check out Rig'em complete lineup at www.rig'emright.com or wherever you buy your hunting gear.
Sure. I grew up here in Wisconsin, central or southern part of the state, near Madison. And my dad was always a big hunter, so I grew up with that. And I think one of the first types of hunting we ever did was duck hunting at local marshes around where I grew up. And I always liked it, but especially back then, this was the 80s. People were more, I guess, generalists than they perhaps are now, where people are kind of specialized in one aspect of hunting or another. But I went to college in Oshkosh and ended up with a circle of friends who were really big into duck hunting. So that kind of really lit the spark for me there. And the college was on a large lake where back then you could have pretty decent access and get quite a lot of hunting in through October and November. And other marshes and creeks and rivers around the area too. So when you had time, you could hunt quite a bit. And it hit a spark with me. And I was a journalism major, and I actually did go into that field to try to become an outdoor writer, believe it or not. And I ended up with a connection at the newspaper there in town, did some freelance outdoor stories for him. And after I graduated, I had an internship there and then went to work full time. And then that same friend who was the outdoor writer at the time went to deer hunting. And I got to do the outdoor page after that for, I think, 4 or 5 years, which was a great experience. After those 5 years, the same friend again, Pat Durkin, hired me at the magazine in Iola. It was Wisconsin Outdoor Journal, which was the state's largest hunting and fishing magazine at the time. And I went to work there and then also started doing turkey hunting and some other magazines too. Worked there for almost 20 years and then went freelance here in 2014, so about 11 years after that. Throughout all that, I mean, duck hunting was always my top outdoor activity. I did a lot of deer hunting, pheasant hunting as well. And then, later in life, got into turkey hunting quite a bit in spring. But in fall, duck hunting was always my number one and almost became obsessive to a point. I just would hunt every day if possible. hours at a time, just never wanting to give it up. And, because we had a lot of opportunity around the area. And I think when I hit, I guess in my 30s, we started to travel too to the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, and got to experience the hunting out there and see what that was like, which was, of course, tremendous, just totally different from the hunting back home in Wisconsin. So I've been, throughout it all, just very fortunate to be able to combine something I love with a career. And then, when the opportunity arose to work with Delta, I'd known a few of the folks at Delta in previous roles. Paul Waite, of course, worked at Krause for many years, and Kyle Winterstein I knew when he was at NRA and had been in a couple of camps with him. When I got the chance to work with those folks at Delta, it just seemed like a natural to me, and I've been very happy to work with everyone there for a few years now. So,
well, we're glad to have you. So now the listener can put a little background to your byline.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great. Like I said, it's just been very fortunate to be able to combine something you love so much, like waterfowl hunting, in a career. It's great, and just being able to travel then a little bit too, and experience and meet hunters from across the country, different perspectives, and you learn so much just seeing how people hunt and their perspectives on conservation and everything. It's really eye-opening. So it's been quite an experience.
Well, you'll definitely bring a balanced perspective, I think, to this discussion that we're going to have here. When I come into these episode recordings, I tell myself, Joel, just stay the course and don't jump down rabbit holes and all these tangents. But you said something that another coworker and I have talked about, and you said it, and you said that go back in the 80s, hunters were more generalists, and people didn't necessarily identify as I'm a blank hunter, right? You were a hunter, but the
Right.
tendency today is I'm a this type of hunter, I'm a that type of hunter, I'm a bow hunter, a duck hunter, a deer hunter. What's your theory on that change?
Well, that's a good question. I'm really not sure. I think maybe it's kind of hard to really be a generalist and be good at it. I mean, someone made the comment to me years ago about how you couldn't be a good bow hunter and a good duck hunter at the same time, because you really needed to dedicate yourself to one or the other. And I'm not sure if that's true, but there is a grain of truth to it. I think that people who really focus on something intently, obviously you get more reps and you tend to get better at that specific genre, and for me it was duck hunting. I bow hunted a little bit when I was younger, but actually then gave it up for many years. Actually, when the liberal season format started, about 95, I guess, I didn't bow hunt anymore, just because you had 50 or 60 days to duck hunt, and I wanted to use all of them. And I just, it seemed like taking a morning off in November to go deer hunting was, you might miss a heck of a bluebill flight on the lake that morning, and I didn't want to do that. Even though I'd seen a lot of great mornings duck hunting, I just wanted to keep experiencing them. And I think a lot of people are that nowadays, and I don't know if it's because there's more specialized equipment involved, or what it is, or maybe just a different mindset. But people, especially duck hunters, I think a lot of them are really just focused on waterfowl nowadays. And you see it with bow hunters as well. Turkey hunters are very, very much, some folks are just, that's all they want to do is hunt turkeys, and that's great. I mean, so I'm not sure if it's a cultural change, or just because there's more opportunity waterfowl hunting nowadays, or the equipment's better, or what it is. But it definitely is a thing, and you see, I'm almost amazed at how people will travel so much nowadays too. I mean, they'll just be able to pick up and if they find out the flight's in South Dakota, late November one year, man, they'll just pick up and get out there and grab a license if they can, or if they have the season license on the river, hunt out there. And so they're mobile, they're willing to travel, and that's their passion. So, which is a cool thing. I mean, it's great to see people who care that much about a sport, like duck hunting.
Yeah, I've wondered, I agree with everything you said there. Maybe to add to it, I've wondered what role the internet has played with that. I think just the information is so much more readily accessible. And I think the traveling hunter was less common, I would say, just because there was so much unknown at the other end, and it took that personality type, I think, that was willing to explore a modern day frontier. But now the internet and OnX and Go Hunt and all those things, it just takes so much of the mystery out of where you're going. And so I kind of wonder, and then just people wanting to be like people, right? Information is just, it's not just the Outdoor Life magazine that I tucked under my pillow.
Right. I think there's a lot to that. I mean, I guess I saw it originally back on the old, online chat forums, waterfowl forums like the Refuge and those. I would always follow those, and the guys on there were personalities, and you saw how hardcore they were, and you tried to almost aspired to be more like them or kind of follow in their footsteps, and whether it was traveling or different types of hunting, or really being quote unquote a hardcore duck hunter, a full season duck hunter, I guess. So I think there probably is a lot to that, and certainly now with social media and YouTube and all the information that's available out there, it's just like you said, it really just people see that and they want to be like those folks, whereas back in the day we just had a local sports shop, or went out, like you said, Outdoor Life magazine, which had a lot of different types of hunting and fishing articles in it, but it was, again, very general, And I think that's kind of how they followed it back then.
Well, it's hunting, so it's all good. It's kind of like cold pizza. It's still good to me, so it doesn't.
That's right.
Hunting's awesome. So, well, let's get into today's conversation. Well, Brian, as we said, you write the strategies column for Delta, and you write for other publications. One of the things that I understand that you write about on occasion is how to hunt with limited time. And so, what do you think? So, obviously, that this is a topic that people have expressed an interest in talking about and learning more about. What do you think it is about this quick hunt mindset that hunters find this topic of interest?
I think many folks are in a similar situation where they just have limited time, especially nowadays where there are so many demands, and it's they want to follow their passion, they want to go duck hunting, but because of commitments, professional family commitments, they can't, or they can't devote a lot of time to it. So it's almost like a compromise, I think, where you can still feed your passion, get out in the marsh a little bit, enjoy a duck hunt, and still work a shift, honor your family commitments, go to church, what have you. And it's I call it a compromise. It's really not a compromise. It's kind of trying to squeeze the most out of a day, I guess, as possible. And it's, honestly, it's a lot of work, and it takes quite a commitment to do it. But if you enjoy duck hunting enough, it's certainly worthwhile.
Do you think?
And I think that strikes a chord with people.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you think? So there's the concept of a 60-minute hunt, in, out. How, and I think everybody gets that. How common do you think 1 hour hunts are today? Do you think, do you think people go on 1 hour hunts?
I think some still do, yeah. I guess it just depends on your situation. Like I said before, when I worked in the office for many years at Krause, it was in a rural area, so you had a lot of opportunities like that very close by. Now, obviously, if you have a half-hour commute to work in a metro area, you're probably not going to be able to squeeze in a duck hunt in the morning and still make it to work on time. But my situation was not unique, but I mean, just kind of tailor-made for that type of stuff. I had quite a long commute, but I could do it in the dark before shooting hours, get to a place, get in, be set up at first light, hunt the amount of time I could, and then make sure I could pack out and get to the office on time. And it usually wasn't more than 10 or 15 minutes away from where I was hunting. So it was, ideal in many ways for me. But so I guess, I think if folks are in situations like that, it's probably fairly common, because a lot of people at the office would do that hunt in the mornings before work, would bow hunting, goose hunting, turkey hunting, whatever, and still be to work by 8, 9 o'clock, and to work their shift. In a big metro area, not as much, but I think if you find yourself or in that kind of situation, it's still very viable.
Well, I think weekends provide a great opportunity as well. I think back to when my kids were little, they both played soccer, and soccer in the fall was Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning. So it was like, okay, now we have a radius that we can travel. We can't go past that radius or we're not going to make it back. So I think it's a universal concept. But yeah, I suppose work where you have this fixed early starting time at 8 o'clock. Yeah, I can see that where if you have an hour to get out of the city or a half an hour out of the city, you're probably not going to make it back in time.
Yeah.
So it may not apply. But on the weekends, that's a little different thing. So just to kind of paint the picture, Brian, what can you describe for the listener a particularly memorable short hunt that you've experienced in the past? Like if you close your eyes, what do you picture?
Again, it was a situation, usually small waters, and my goal was always just get in, be set up and ready by first light, and these were situations that I thought would be ideal. It wasn't like a diver hunting situation where you might get a good flight later in the morning, something like that. I knew I wanted to be right there where ducks wanted to be in the early morning. And just for example, there was a small lake I used to hunt quite a bit, and it never held a lot of ducks, but certainly hunting by yourself for a quick hunt, it held plenty of them, 2, 3 dozen at a time. And they would always come off of bigger waters at first light or before it and come into this little slough to feed on the vegetation there. And I remember several times, I think the first morning I ever hunted it was just, wasn't expecting much, didn't know what. I knew there had been some ducks there, but I only had an hour to hunt and didn't know what to expect, and was just in awe when I saw all of a sudden these birds come out of the sky and just cup and circle the lake and come right in the decoys, right at shooting hours. And I think I probably got 3 or 4 ducks that morning, and just thought it was to me it was a tremendous success. I'm like, this is great. I got 3 or 4 ducks and still got to work on time, and just felt like it made the most of the day and of the situation. And of course, they don't always work out like that. I mean, some days you'd go to a similar situation and look at the sky and see nothing, I'm like, well, I got to go to work. But I never felt it was not worthwhile, because I still got to get outside and you learn something. Even from those unsuccessful hunts, you learn something. I mean, mainly not to go back and try that again.
Right.
But you were still outside and still got to experience, a duck hunt. And like I always say, results may vary, but it was still always worthwhile, in my opinion.
I like that you kind of said, in other words, you said they can serve as little scouting trips. So maybe you saw them work a different point, or maybe the approach wasn't exactly the way you had it set up, and so that can inform other 60-minute hunts.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, and on many of those hunts where I wasn't successful, whether it was on hunting a creek or hunting sloughs, you usually would see some ducks and get an idea of their movement. And a lot of times the lake I mentioned is next to a small slough that used to have cattle in it, and I could hunt that as well. And many times I would see ducks go in there and not in the lake, so I knew later that week I would try to hunt the slough instead of the lake. Or on creeks, for example, you might see you have a point where you thought the wood ducks were going to pass through in the morning, and they didn't, but you probably saw some go downriver or fly overhead, or maybe go to feed in a cornfield or something like that. So every little bit of that info you get is time worth spending. It's like fishing. You're motoring along and casting, and 90% of your casts are just going to be in unproductive water, but they're still worthwhile because you're identifying that unproductive water, and which just helps you focus all the more on the productive stuff. So, and then once you kind of lock in your pattern, you can really focus your efforts there and have more consistent success. So that's how I kind of looked at those unsuccessful trips.
That makes a lot of sense. So if we're talking about, then again, going to kind of help the listener maybe think and plan and conduct their own 60-minute hunt. So when it comes down to planning and scouting, I mean, I can see two forms of scouting. I can see e-scouting, and I can also see, more traditional scouting. So when you're planning for these short bursts of hunting excursions, how do you recommend people approach scouting?
I always, before e-scouting was really a thing, it was all boots on the ground. But I guess some days I would just, get out a gazetteer or a map and identify spots that looked ducky and, check them out in the daylight to try to get a feel of how I could get in and out of there. And, if you walked in and saw some ducks or jumped some ducks, all the better. You knew that they were using it. And then you could kind of get a game plan going. And some occasions I might try and hunt those areas the next morning, or in others, I maybe needed a little better intel. And there's no better intel than actually scouting that place when you intend to hunt it to get an idea of how the morning might play out. For example, are the birds roosting there? Are they flying in from somewhere else? How do they approach it based on the wind direction? Are there any particular areas they seem to favor on that water? Any flight paths you notice? And there's nothing that beats just a morning of sitting there and watching them and getting an idea of that before you go back in and actually, have the game go live. So some days I would do that. Other days, if I was really antsy, I would just kind of wing it and go in there. And, some days it would work out. Other days you realized you maybe missed the X by a little bit, or you way overestimated how much birds were using it. And that's right. That's fine. Just kind of, like you said, pass those off as scouting trips and use that info for future hunts. But now with e-scouting, it's just so much easier. You can do the same thing. You can look at Onyx and just, in an area, say around your office or where you have opportunity to hunt, find little waters that might be ducky. Then you can go put boots on the ground and check them out, whether during daylight or in the morning, and really get a good idea of how you might pull off an hour hunt.
Lucky Duck is a proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. While being an industry leader in waterfowl motion decoys is their focus, they have the hunter in mind when designing all of their products. From their 5-star crash-rated Lucky Duck kennel to their full line of predator hunting gear, they are committed to serving the hunter 365 days a year. Check out their wonderful line of products at www.luckyduck.com or at a local retailer near you. I really enjoyed, this is fun. It's actually a style of hunting because, my kids are older now. They're 19 and 16, but when they were in the depths, of needing to be parented and their own activities and my job and home responsibilities, that kind of was the textbook definition is exactly what we're talking about here. One of the interesting things that I would find is the mornings. I would still do the 1-hour hunts, maybe 2-hour hunts, but it would be the mornings were the most difficult for me, and the evenings were the most difficult for me. And what I found, particularly when the blue-winged teal were hanging around, I found I'd go out in the middle of the day or mid-morning. I'd go out there for a couple hours, and I would find there'd be this kind of mini flight of blue wings in the middle of the day, and I could consistently knock down, 1 to 5 when I went out. And so I think we do tend to think we'll go out, before work. But I suppose, though, Brian, lunch breaks, taking little gaps, especially if you're jump shooting, if you're looking for, to find some woodies or something like that. I think in today's duck hunting world, I think jump shooting tends to be frowned upon, I suppose. But I would remember, though, if you're thinking about, these small creek, or backwater systems out in the middle of the woods, I don't know. I don't. A lot of those types of locations, Brian, in my opinion, are really only set up for jump shooting, right? They're not big gathering places for ducks, and you kind of have to put the boot leather on and have success that way.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point. I also did quite a few 1-hour hunts at lunch break too, jump shooting wood ducks and mallards, depending on the situation. But yeah, there were places that didn't, they didn't hold 500 ducks or anything like that. They would hold, maybe 20 in smaller groups, from one little bend to the next. And, if you had access or could just wade in the creek or take a little skiff in there, you could easily, drift downstream for a half an hour, probably get 2 or 3 really good shot opportunities and paddle back and, make it a very quick hunt. And I think it is frowned upon some nowadays, but I think a lot of that's more frowned upon, jumping sloughs and things like that. Especially like out in prairie pothole country, you'll see a slough full of ducks and some guys will want to go jump it. And my thought is always, gosh, let's not scare 100 ducks to kill 2 or 3. Let's get there the next morning and, we can likely get a lot more ducks and have a much more classic hunt. But in a creek situation like that, it really is one of the best ways to hunt it. Decoying in small creeks like that can be kind of hit or miss and very tricky shooting wise, So jump shooting to me was always a great opportunity early for wood ducks. And when the lakes froze later in the year and those creeks were the only water that was open, there were really a lot of mallards in some of them. And that's really fun hunting. To be able to sneak up on a group of greenheads like that and jump them is pretty cool. So.
Well, and then I imagine for the part of country that you're hunting in primarily, a bonus rough grouse here and there is not a bad thing either.
Yeah. No, not at all. That's always nice. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mark down some scrapes and some buck rubs maybe at the same time.
But, yeah. Every now and then, for sure.
Yeah. So now I think when we're talking about these 60-minute hunts, and now if we're kind of shifting the conversation to gear, we're probably thinking, Brian, we're thinking fast and mobile. Would that be kind of more of the mindset? So what's the, maybe we'll go to one extreme. What's the leanest? And let's skip over jump shooting, but let's say there's some amount of equipment rather than just boots and a gun. What's the leanest setup that you've had success with?
Pretty much just probably 8 Texas rig decoys and a pair of waders. And if it's a walk-in hunt, obviously, but an easy walk. These smaller waters for those quick hunts, I'll never put out a lot of decoys, I guess, just because you don't need them typically. You just want to, the ducks, usually if you have done your scouting, the ducks want to be there anyway for some reason. So the decoys are just there to kind of reassure them and maybe kind of, focus them on your position so you get good shots. But yeah, I'll just throw those over my back, walk in, and toss a few out and go from there. And then maybe the heaviest I ever go equipment wise would be a canoe or a small poke boat. And just if I need to access deeper water, like the lake I mentioned previously, or there was some other lakes I hunted too, quickie hunts before work. You could slip that in before dark and just do a quick, 10-minute paddle throughout, again, probably 6-8 decoys, hunt for a little bit, hopefully get some shooting and be in and out very efficiently. But it's never, the gear is always kind of what slows you down, like a big water diver hunt. You could be very difficult to pull off in that amount of time, especially if you're trailering a boat, throwing out, 4 or 5 long lines of decoys, all that. That in itself probably takes a half hour to set up and another half hour to clean up, So I always thought about time and efficiency and just getting in as lightly as I could and making the most of the hunting time I had.
What role does motion play in those setups? Is it, I could imagine, that low light textbook definition, if you're only out there for an hour, that first half is at low light. Does motion play an important role in that scene?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not a big spinner guy over water. So what I would try to do, especially, how it is, some mornings they forecast the wind to be 10 miles an hour, but it's just dead calm at mid-morning. And when ducks are coming on, circling, your decoys look like fake plastic ducks on a mirror surface, So I would try to hedge my bets and hunt windy conditions if I could and get some natural motion. If not, I would sometimes try to take just a very cheap kind of homemade jerk rig in there to try to at least get a little bit of motion going on the water surface. Kind of make it look like the decoys were swimming around, make them look like live ducks. And it plays a huge role, especially after ducks have been shot at for a while. If you have a brand new, say you find a brand new spot and can get in there and ducks are using it, it's maybe not quite as critical because they want to be there anyway and they're not, maybe haven't been shot at, haven't been spooked. But once they've felt that human hunting pressure, they're going to want to be darn sure that everything looks legit before they commit and want to go in there. So
Yeah. No, I think, I do think that personally, I do think motion, that I don't know if the ducks are not as discerning at that early light, or if they're just not able to pick out the detail, obviously, then once the sun comes up. But I hunted with a jerk rig for the first time. It's weird to say that. I've been hunting my whole life, way before I could carry a gun, but I hunted with a jerk rig for the first time last week. Cole, how old are you?
26.
Okay. So I was hunting with a couple guys from the office last week, 26, and then Michael's, 25? 27. So I learned from a couple guys in their mid-20s, and I never would have thought, like, that's such a traditional rig. But we were out there hunting, and the wind wasn't moving, and I'm like, gosh, if we only had a jerk rig. And one of the guys, Michael, works here. He's like, I got one in my bag, and so got that set up, and it really added some nice life and changed the trajectory of our hunt a little bit. And motion. And guess what? It was a tiny little bag,
Oh, really?
Tiny little bag, and so I think anybody who wants to do these 60-minute mobile hunts, that'd be a great tip. Get that motion out there. And a jerk rig, whether you're a traditionalist or, love spinners, motion's been around forever, right?
Yep. That's right. I'm even some of like the feeding tip-up decoys. I've seen those work too. And, spinners still work in many situations. It just seems, especially I think where we're at in our part of the country, when you have a lot of, it's production states, you have a lot of young ducks around too. And they haven't been shot at up and down the flyway already. So I think they probably work better here than they would, say in Arkansas in January, after the ducks have been harassed all the way down the flyway to the prairie there. But it's always critical. Anytime you can get motion in those decoys, whether through artificial means or the wind, it's almost always going to pay off.
So, I think I think what we've discussed so far tends to lean more towards the dabbler species, right? Mallards, wood ducks, things like that. Do you find that those first light, 1 hour or half hour quick shoots, does this, I know we talked about the limitations of big diver spreads, of course, you got the boat and all the decoys, I can see that's not going to fit in there, but are there 60-minute diver hunts, like
Sure.
a pass, a point, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we used to do quite a bit of short hunting, and when I worked at the newspaper and then later at the magazine, and we were very fortunate at the point we hunted, we could keep our decoys out there on long lines, so we could actually have a pretty good setup placed out in the water, within, say, 15 minutes. And many days, we all had to go to work, so we go out there for the first hour, and when it came time to pull in, we could just pull the decoys up and set them on shore. And it in a public area or someplace where you can't keep decoys, you can still get a shoot in. You just obviously are not going to be probably wanting to pick up 100 decoys by hand if you have to be somewhere at 8:30, 9 o'clock. But depending on the species too and the situation, I mean, even throwing out a couple dozen for that first hour and seeing what happens can always pay dividends. It's divers are. It always seemed like you would get a flurry early in the morning, and then a lot of your action happened when the wind kicked up, say later in the morning, or even that 9 o'clock, 10:30 classic diver flight time. But it was always, even the time we had half hour to hunt early in the morning, it was always worthwhile going. I mean, any birds you got, and some days you would get into quite a few too. It was always worth it. So, and you got to, as you were sitting there, even if you didn't have success, like you alluded to before, you could watch them trading on the lake and kind of get an idea of what they were doing, which might, set up your next hunt too. So, and you can, that's a very big water situation I was talking about, of course, but even smaller waters, say prairie potholes, with species like redheads or ringnecks, if you find a little spot, you can get in pretty quickly. And if they want to be there, you can have probably a pretty great diver hunt in an hour if you're in the right spot.
I do find, I think all ducks are habitual, but I do personally find diving ducks to be a little bit more habitual in, I'm on this body of water, I tend to fly over this location. And sure, maybe it shifts a little bit with wind direction and wind speed, but I do tend to find that's a great diver point, and you can have a reliable hunt pretty much any time. It's just, can you get in there and get out as quickly as you need to.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about concealment. I'm just curious. I think a lot of our listeners, some percentage of our listeners, they hunt in permanent blinds or very traditional, and may approach the hunt very different from this. It's my spot, it's my blind, and maybe there's different blinds and that are rotated through, but it's concealment is already there, let's say. So in this type of situation where you're bombing in, bombing out, I'm guessing there's the ever faithful just find natural concealment, but do you bring in concealment ever, or is that not part of your equipment?
Sometimes, and it again would depend on the situation. A lot of times in those small areas, like you said, there is enough natural concealment where you can usually get away with just hunkering in the weeds, or even your back up against a tree away from the shoreline, something like that. But some of them too, depending on water conditions or where the water is located, you might have to bring concealment with you. And I always really relied on a layout blind in a lot of those situations. If you could, even for, hunting out west and in pothole country, specifically, you would find some years potholes where the water had receded and you had 30 yards of mud flat from the cattails to the water. And, setting up in the cattails, you were already 40 yards away from your decoy. That just wasn't viable. But by setting a layout blind on that mud flat, it didn't work all the time for all the species, but it worked pretty darn well, for most of them, because you can just eliminate your vertical profile. And it took a little effort to lug it in and lug it out. But honestly, if it's a kind of a low intensity gear type hunt anyway, having that layout blind on my back, along with, 8 Texas rig decoys wasn't that much more work. And it made all the difference in the world for covering yourself up. So that was always kind of my go-to. In other situations, I think I might have brought in just like some camo netting or something like that, and just tried to set it up, especially if it was more open shoreline, try to set that up and at least eliminate my silhouette from ducks on the water. It didn't help much when ducks were directly overhead, of course, because they could see down in there, but it did help somewhat, I think. But kind of whatever I could get away with hauling in there, if it made a difference, I would definitely do it, because some days, if you're sticking out, you can get away with that for a little bit, those first few minutes, but once the sun starts illuminating that landscape, those ducks are going to see you and you're not going to get a lot of shooting. So.
Right. So with those in that, and so you're talking about how the shoreline had receded, and maybe that's not the right word, but you have this big open expanse and you can't hide in the cattails. When you'd go out on that mud flat, or there's other locations out here, in the West and both Dakotas where it's land that's heavily grazed. And so it's a great wetland, but there's literally nothing to hide into. Would you brush in your blind with cattails, or would you choose a brown blind? How would you try to blend in your profile?
Try to match it as much as you can. Sometimes it was tough. Like you mentioned, the cattle pasture hunts, which we have done quite a few of out in the Dakotas, and they're great places to shoot ducks, but very tough to hide, and you don't sometimes have an abundance of natural cover nearby to try to mix and match. So I guess what we would always do, if we thought of it, would try to take a weed whacker and, first kind of identify what kind of background we wanted to try to match, and try to find some vegetation that matched that, and just cut as much of it as we could and stuff it into the loops of our blind to try to at least break up that, you don't want a tan blind sitting on a green patch of alfalfa, for example.
Right.
Try to at least make it blend in, whether it was with alfalfa or weeds from a ditch or whatever, and just try to do as much of that as you can. And the nice thing, usually, if you get into a place early enough, you can budget yourself some time to cut a lot and really try to brush in as heavily as possible. And, it's what the old rule about cover is, just when you think you have enough, you might be halfway there. That's kind of the rule we always tried to follow. And it's a lot of work. I mean, it's not, sometimes not very pleasant work either, but grabbing all those weeds and stuffing them through your blind. But I'll tell you, if it helps conceal you, especially in situations like that, it's well worthwhile. When you blend in and those ducks don't see you, you're going to shoot a lot more than if you had gone in there just with a blind that sticks out or trying to use natural cover to hide yourself.
Yeah, I have some friends that do a lot of field hunting. They do a lot of hunting, and it's almost exclusively in fields. So they have enough blinds that for that season they'll have some brushed in with corn, they'll have some brushed in with whatever the dominant vegetative or agricultural crop type is, so that way they don't have to brush it in every single time. But most people have one blind, and you have to strip it and restuff it for every different type of terrain.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think we used to, goose hunting too. We did a lot of that too before work. And that was always a conundrum. You'd be in like a wheat field opening day or an oat field. So you'd get, some straw and try to grass your blind in that way. Well, then the geese moved to an alfalfa field. You have to start, start again basically and get, green vegetation in there. And so you were always things like tearing out vegetation from your blind and replacing it with other stuff, and then getting ready to do it again the next time. But again, I always thought it was time well spent. If you looked at your blind in the daylight and thought, man, that really blends in nicely, you thought you had done something really good on that hunt. And if you looked at it and thought, well, no wonder they flared, my gosh, we're sticking out here horribly, it makes a tremendous difference.
Yeah. Do you find that weather or timing of migration, do you feel like those play a role in the ability to have a successful 60-minute hunt?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's always, I think, always better with fresh birds, whether that's early season with local birds or, one of my favorite times to hunt those type of hunts was freeze up, when a lot of the big bodies of water would freeze and those little creeks and spring holes would suddenly load up with ducks because that was the only open water they had in the area. And it was amazing how those ducks acted in those small waters compared to how they had acted when you hunted probably the same birds on a nearby lake, earlier that month. They went from being these spooky, wary ducks to all of a sudden, because they're kind of out of sorts in a new environment, just, sucking right in, basically, in many situations. So it definitely does. And, talking about diver hunting or even with most puddle duck species too, I mean, anytime you get that little push of fresh ducks that haven't felt that pressure, it just makes a tremendous difference. I think that's what we all wait for over the course of a 60-day season. There's always usually typically good action early, and then you kind of hit a lull where there's not much of a migration. You get those first pushes and they can just be gold, and you just want continuous pushes like that, which doesn't always work out oftentimes, especially it seemed like last year with the warm fall we experienced. You had prolonged periods of stale ducks, and it doesn't, even when new birds come into an area, a buddy of mine who guides, he says he figures that those birds probably have 2 or 3 days before they just are acting like local ducks. Mm-hmm. That's all it takes. They feel that pressure, and within 2 or 3 days, they're tough ducks, like tough stale ducks, just like the ones who have been there all season. So timing it right is very important. Sometimes you got to get lucky. Sometimes you keep an eye on the weather and you can make it work. But when you experience it, it's fantastic.
So when you get into that stale duck moment or period, the ducks not all the ducks left. They just became maybe wise. And so do you find yourself mixing it up a little bit, going into different locations, hunting the same location differently? Do you find yourself mixing things up a little bit? Yeah,
both of those. I mean, I think, a lot of times you duck hunters can be stubborn. I can be stubborn. So you'll want to go out and you'll say, well, I mean, maybe with a little different wind or a little whatever, I'll have better luck today. And you end up hunting the same stale ducks and having the same poor results, what you really should be doing is probably exploring all new areas, trying to find, and everyone talks about it, it's very hard to do, but trying to find little pockets where those ducks haven't been exploited yet, whether it's a new backwater, like you mentioned, a creek, some potholes or back bays where maybe it's just very difficult to access, but anything where those ducks maybe haven't been harassed, like the ducks that you've been hunting day after day on, the river or the lake or what have you. And that requires a lot of scouting. So what you end up doing probably is scouting more than you hunt. So you kind of feel like you're missing out on the hunting portion. But, I always looked at it, it's like, well, I could sit here morning after morning and maybe scratch down one bird, or I could scout 2-3 mornings, hopefully find something good and have a really good hunt one morning, which to me is more enjoyable than just going morning after morning and scratching down a bird or two if you're lucky. So it's kind of a catch 22, I guess. But I'm always trying to look for something different when it gets like that, and you can try to hope and wish that it's going to be different that day, but unless you get a major weather shift or some type of different situation, it generally isn't. You can get lucky, of course, especially on big water, but when it gets tough like that, I'm always just looking for something out of the ordinary.
I love this conversation, Brian. I really do. Is that I've never met anybody that said they've hunted enough, right? Even if they hunted every day of the season, they still want more, right? And so what I love about this conversation is I do think that it's really easy to become, I don't want to say if it's a poor me or maybe prisoner of the moment, and it's that you have this type of hunt that you want, and that becomes your standard. And if you can't live up to it, you're not going to do it. And that is a concern. We've been, people that are listening, regular listeners to this podcast, we've been trying to place an emphasis on all of the cool aspects of hunting ducks. Yes, that include harvesting ducks. I mean, if you told me that I could never shoot another duck again, I guess that would take probably all the energy out of going duck hunting, right? I probably wouldn't go either, right? So we're not talking about that, but we are talking about maybe opening our minds and maybe softening our expectations, still wanting that great, that bag limit hunt that you close your eyes and lay your head on the pillow. We're all chasing that, but if that's the standard, now we've got a problem. And so this is an approach, possibly, if people can open their mind to it. Okay, where are all those little places, those little sleepy little places that I get 1 duck or 3 ducks, or I don't get any, but maybe every once in a while I scratch down my limit real fast. And so I really, really, really like this conversation. And it's not for everybody, and not everybody lives in a location like you properly pointed out, but I would challenge people, all those little places that we drive by and we think that's not my stereotypical textbook hunt, to just maybe look at the world a little bit differently through a little different lens. I kind of have one maybe a wrap-up question on the tactical side, is that, of course, these 60-minute hunts, they have to be within a travel distance that someone can you can go really far in the dark, or you can do a ton of that extra prep work in the dark that you maybe don't have to do on the backside of the hunt. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to get back to it, right? So there is everybody has that 1 or 2 hour radius, distance-wise, that they have to get back to. But if you looked at all of your 60-minute hunts or your short hunts, is there anything that they have in common, or is it just literally in a ton of different forms?
They do take many forms. I'm trying to think the one thing in common is just identifying the situation where you hedge your bets, and now these are the very successful 60-minute hunts, but situations where you hedge your bets where ducks are going to want to be there that first half hour in the morning. And that's, like I said, primarily a puddle duck deal, but again, with divers too, it can happen as well, depending on the species. But that was the main common thread, and again, a lot of it was in central Wisconsin was wood ducks, but even areas where you were shooting, mallards, pintails, teal, it was generally an area where that first hour was going to be your best bet. And not that you wouldn't get more ducks by staying there all morning, but that was going to be the bulk of your action for the day, simply because they were, leaving bigger water, before light and flying to these small areas to feed on acorns, vegetation, whatever. And just by identifying enough of those, those are the ones I always kind of threw my effort into, because I knew it would be potentially worthwhile. And there are other times too where I would, take a flyer on a spot and try it and it didn't work out, and maybe then realize that it was a spot that was better hunted for a longer period. If you had all morning on a weekend, for example, or it could go in the evening, it was time better spent then. But, basically I'd just try to hunt as much as I could, get in as many as I could over the course of the season, just to kind of feed that addiction. And a lot of it was a point that you made earlier. Duck hunting is very hard work in many cases. It requires a lot of effort, sometimes physical effort, a lot of planning, early mornings, harsh environments, and some days you don't succeed. So you really have to love everything about duck hunting to want to go duck hunting that much. I mean, it's got to be worth it to you to get up that early, see the sunrise. I mean, see the marsh come alive. It's all got to be part of it for you, even if you don't get ducks, And even days when I didn't get many ducks, all that still made it to me seem very worthwhile to do those hunts, And I think a lot of folks are like that. And those are the people that are really hardcore duck hunters. I mean, they just the entire experience that they really enjoy that keeps them going out there, even if it's only for an hour before work.
Well, I hope people that were maybe on the fence or considering, I bet you I can just picture listeners, going, okay, where could I slip in one of those locations? But I think just to maybe open the mind a little bit further, you made a great point there, is that, there's days of the week where we have time commitments, right? I have to be back by a certain time. So you can think of it as a hunt in and of itself. I got something, I didn't get something, and enjoy it for what it is. But you made a point there, is that you let's say, picture it's a large marsh. And so this 60-minute hunt kind of requires you to work the edge, right? You can't go deeply into the marsh. So you have that 60-minute hunt of its own reward, but it allows you almost like a scouting trip to say, oh, wow, on Saturday when I can stay out there till 3 in the afternoon, or I don't have that backdrop, you actually located a hunt. You got to see an area of the marsh where the ducks worked, or they were dumping into this little hole that you couldn't see, on your scouting trip. So I do think that they can work in, whether it's a public hunting area, whether it's your own private land. I would imagine that many private land duck hunters have their, I bet you, Brian, if it's your own private duck hunting ground, I bet you everybody has their go-to spots and the places they're not thinking of. So go work the edges, and you may not want to disturb your prime duck hunting location. So go sniff around, find those little edges and get out there and have some fun. And I think too, one thing too, I find, kids tend to lack patience. So those quick little hunts can be great too for kids. It's a lot of movement, a lot of that early action when you do have it.
Yep.
And then you're back, before anybody gets bored and yeah.
Yep, that's exactly true. I remember that, just taking my nephews and other people on youth hunts, they'd be very into it that first hour when ducks were flying, but you'd hit that mid-morning lull or whatever, and right away you could just kind of see their attention kind of wane and even hang their head or look around or maybe mess around on their phone or whatever. But yeah, so those can be ideal for kids for sure, and let's face it, many adults are impatient too,
Yeah.
Some people like to get results right away and just for whatever reason just don't have the patience to sit out in a situation like that all day. But
yeah, good point. Well, in parting, if you think a listener doesn't hunt this way and you think they're on the fence, what's one last thing that you would tell them to encourage them to explore this type of hunting?
It's just more opportunity. It's quick, and many people don't like to feel rushed, and I certainly understand that. I don't like to either, but I always look at it, everyone as an opportunity, even if it's only for an hour. You still have a chance to go duck hunting, and many a times in the right situation, you can have a successful hunt. And as we've said many all along through this podcast, even if you don't find success that day, you're still learning something. You're still getting out there, still getting experience, and still learning something. So that's just more ammunition for the next hunt, the next time you try it. And to me, it was never wasted effort. Whether I got 6 ducks or no ducks, I always felt good about getting out there and going duck hunting. It just put me in a good frame of mind for the rest of the day. And like I say, I got to feed my addiction and get out there and enjoy the marsh. And to me, that's, even if it's only for an hour, that's time well spent.
It makes me want to ditch the rest of work for the next hour. Well, perfect, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it was great to introduce you, in longer form to Delta's readership, and it was a pleasure getting to know you, and thanks for sharing your background and a few tips and tactics that I might even give a try.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed it very much.
Right on. Okay, Brian. Well, let's do this again. Pick another subject and beat it up.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll count on it.
All right. Thanks. You take care.
Thanks, Joe.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl.